Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. I would like to answer a couple of questions. These are short questions with shorter answers about the general experience of stalking and questions related to that. And one of the questions is, are you sure you're being followed? And a lot of the victims of gang stalking receive that. And in my case, the answer is absolutely yes, because the intelligence agencies made it absolutely clear from, if not day one, then certainly week 1 or week 2, that I'm being under surveillance by making it as overt as possible. There was a man waiting outside my drive every morning, and then I was followed down, and the actual gang stalking chain was bit by bit built up so that I literally mapped out this system one by one. However, what people can do if you're unsure, if you're maybe new on these surveillance lists, is that you can actually test the system. So I ran in the beginning to convince myself. I ran a couple of tests where you can see that you can check if you're being followed. And I would say trust your gut feeling, because your gut feeling has been calibrated, if you like, on the years and years or maybe decades that you've been alive before. And what that means is that your brain is calibrated on what the world is like. So when things change in your environment, your brain is finely tuned to actually pick up the slightest changes. So trust your feeling. If you've got the impression someone's following you, my advice would be spontaneously just pop into a kiosk or spontaneously change your direction. Pop into a shop, even if you're planning to go somewhere else. Just pop in as if this is where you wanted to go. Because in my experience, in the beginning, people would stop. So what happened, you have to kind of test the system, because the way the gang stalking is set up, that it's not necessarily the person who is behind you who will stop. That's only the case if that's the only person on that track, and usually there's a certain redundancy in the system. But if you're lucky, so if you're on one of these stalking lists, you will be on them possibly for life. So you've got all the rest of your life to figure this out, if this is the case or not. So you can test it many times. And but I discovered that if I pop into a kiosk, the person who I suspected of being part of the gang stalking would stop outside and light a cigarette, or maybe stop and type something on their mobile phone. And if I stayed indoors for too long, or they couldn't follow me into the kiosk without it being odd, then they would light a cigarette, and if I stayed for longer than the duration of the cigarette, they would go, and by the time I came out, someone else in the street was stationary and actually watching me. So someone might have arrived on a bicycle and stopped and was just standing next to the bicycle watching the place from where I was coming out, or many other things. And remember that you can be followed with cars, with bicycles, with scooters. At certain big junctions, it's also not unusual to have one of these surveillance flats higher up. So also check the first or second or third floor. Is there someone, visibly standing next to the window? Of course, if they're standing behind the curtain, you can't really tell. But this entire surveillance network is pretty decentralized and is fairly interactive. So, but when you feel, if people can stare at you from the first and third floor window, anywhere, and you just wouldn't notice it, it wouldn't bother you. But if someone is actively stalking you and following you, they would have to somehow, tailgate you, and that you can pick up. So suddenly U-turning, and then just U-turn as if you've forgotten something, walk back and then turn off, and then see if somebody comes after you. I did have occasions where I just U-turned spontaneously, so I would just go a certain route, and I did that in Munich quite a lot. So I would go, for example, to the university library, the Staatsbibliothek, quite a lot to work, and then I would have to change trains, and I would have to go there, by a fairly long journey. And then one day where I had to change trains, I just spontaneously on the spot, I just diverted and walked out of the train station. And it was really funny, because there was one guy who I suspected he was following me. And, I'd had this gut feeling I'd seen him before. And I also kind of remembered that he was waiting on the upstairs platform. And then, as I turned, I walked out of the station, but walking around the corner, I actually just stopped, turned around and was leaning against the wall. And 4 seconds later, this guy almost ran into me because he was in such a rush to come after me. And before, he was just really cool, you know, walking up. There was a long wait for the next train to arrive. And suddenly I changed direction. And in that moment, this guy's also in a total panic and just dashes after me, so that, you know, dashing around the corner, he almost collides with me. Well, that's a pretty good indication. You know, it's like, again, coincidence, you know. So what are the chances that someone would, you know, suddenly just be in a real rush to follow you? So there are many, many ways to figure this out. And also remember that the surveillance systems these days are not just 2 guys in a trench coat following you, because that's, first of all, you know, easy to spot. It's easy to lose the person you're tracking. So it's actually a decentralized network. So what I've discovered, it seems to be just like crisscross patterns. So people, you know, walk around blocks of buildings inside cities, and they're coming. Sometimes the change of guards would be to a person who's coming from the other direction, because people usually think about following to be from behind, you know, but they can follow you or keep track of you by also walking towards you, you know. So that's an even better way to keep an eye on you, because your eyes are kind of forward and you survey the field, you know. So it's kind of like much more decentralized, but this is a really good way of telling. And then also, I mean, a lot of the times it will be quite overt, so it's not, you know, not that hard to pick it out. And then another question I got a lot was, why would they do it so overtly? You know, because in my case it was pretty demonstrative, you know, overt sort of stalking. And the question is, why would they do it so overtly? Well, there are 2 reasons for this, actually 3 reasons for this. And one of them is that if you, first of all, and this is probably the main reason, they can also track you without you noticing, right? But this is not the whole point of the program. The program is to disconcert you. The program is to get under your skin. The program is to kind of try to set up triggers that you react to. So it's kind of like hooks, you know, you have to see certain things over and over. And this would be stupid stuff. I mean, the main point is that you notice things. Otherwise, you can't condition people. You know, if you just walk around the street and people try really hard, but you've just got, you know, music in your ears and you're just looking down on the pavement, I mean, that is really awful for them, because how on earth are they going to condition you? So they literally have to jump in your path and just try to do something utterly unusual. And unusual things could be anything. I mean, let's say you are, you know, something, colors work really well, you know, big areas with unusual colors. So for example, yellow cars are fantastic because yellow cars are just so rare. So if you know, get taken over by overtaken by yellow cars, maybe walking down the street, and they honk their horn, that's fantastic, because you'll think, oh, this is a yellow car. That will stick in your mind. The honking of the horn will stick in your mind. And having a yellow car honk its horn will really stick in your mind. And then if you're on your own, they will do it like half a dozen times or a dozen times. You know, it costs them nothing. And then they will do it whilst you're alone. And next time you're with your partner or your family, another yellow car will drive by and honk its horn. And the idea is that then you go, oh, it happened again. And your partner or your family, who's totally oblivious to the entire conditioning routine beforehand, will think, yeah, okay, but don't flip out. I mean, you know, so what? A yellow car honked its horn. But of course, they will not have been conditioned, you know, and this is how the entire system is set up. So I would recommend that you think about it in these terms, and you literally approach it like, okay, what's being done to me is a scientific conditioning program. And let's just pick out what the conditioning triggers are that these people are trying so hard to condition me on. So in the beginning, my conditioning triggers were a bunch of old guys in trench coats and old hats, you know, like, or dark hats. It's like, oh yeah, think spy, you know, okay, good, granddad, got that. And then once you've got that, you can actually look at the schedule with which these people will set it up, because it should follow a conditioning routine. And this means in the beginning it will be fairly frequent, and then kind of a bit rarer, and there will be some reinforcement, and maybe if you don't react, they will try to teach you again, make you react to it, you know, and then kind of loosen it up, because frankly it's also quite, you know, laborious for them. and they get bored as well. So having to monkey around, you know, with the same stuff over and over kind of grates on you, you know. So they like to try new stuff also to keep themselves amused, to keep their little like idiotic gang stalkers amused. So there's all of this actually factors in, because it is a human system and you have to work with humans. And that's why it's actually so overt. So they will try to get in your face, because if you didn't notice and you couldn't give a shit, then yeah, you know, I mean, just imagine their self-worth would be even lower than it's already. So the entire thing is, and if it bothers you, because eventually they will get in your face, do not get bothered. Think about like a scientist and think, okay, what sort of triggers are they setting up? And keep a diary. Just keep a diary. Whatever you notice, just have a little booklet, write down the day and write down the time. Doesn't matter, it's your personal booklet. And the other thing is, if you write it down, it's out of your mind. But when you go back, like 3 weeks later, then you can see the pattern. And if you have stuff like, you know, yellow cars honking the horn or whatever these Muppets think about for you, you should be able to pick out the conditioning routine. You have to be able to pick it out, because this is what they're doing, you know. Or you can see that actually they don't just use one trigger, they're trying to use different triggers. And then if you write them down with date and timestamps, and occasionally you photograph it so that your digital camera also has got timestamps, and you back it up, then this is fantastic for court cases, because then you can show these people will try to use the hooks again, these triggers later on. That's the entire point. It's like later on they will try to do intimidation theater and go boo, you know, and then you're meant to go, oh no, they're using the same stuff, and yeah, this sort of shit. So, but anyway, there has to be a scientific pattern, and these guys will be using the conditioning routine. And then you can actually tell on black and white on your schedule that, yeah, this is what they're using. So every single time these Muppets think of something, you know, don't get bothered. Think, yes, this goes into my book. The more you monkey around, the more information I have about that. And okay, if you can't necessarily like prove it, because you can't whip out a digital camera quick enough, or you can't get out your mobile phone and, you know, turn on the camera quick enough, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what really matters is picking out the information, you know, for you to be able to analyze it. And then all you have to prove in court is that you're not a compulsive liar. And as soon as we've got the conditioning routine, it's fairly clear what's happening there, you know. I mean, right now the courts sometimes go la, 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 but they can't really go like that when thousands of people are approaching them with the same stories. You know, all have got different backgrounds, different histories, and more importantly, you know, the vast majority of them are high integrity people. So it's pretty hard to explain something like that away. So just collect your data, and actually what it will help you to understand a lot of the stuff. And look at it positively, because once you have seen this sort of conditioning in action and you realize, oh, this really does go under people's skin, because your brain does learn, you can turn it around. What you can do is you can think, hang on, if this works, can I teach myself to positive thinking and use the same conditioning routine to actually think of something positive? And the thing is, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And what you can do, for example, is that you think, whatever, pick something that's really common, like a red car overtaking you. Like you pick the triggers. A red car overtaking you, and then you pick what you're going to do when you see that red car to somehow have a more positive attitude. And pick something that's fairly frequent but still random, because the randomization is what it's kind of like the random prompting that in the end has got the biggest learning effect for your brain. So pick something random, like a red car overtaking you, and then you think, every single time a red car overtakes me, I'm going to actively think, I'm going to beat the bastards in court or something. You know, or I'm gonna get that job I really want to. And you just keep reinforcing something positive. But this is excellent because you pick the message, make it positive. Don't think something negative like, you know, the message mustn't be negative. So you don't think, oh, all the harassment will not kill me, because then it has the words harassment and kill in it. It's kind of like a negative message. So use the conditioning with just pure positive stuff. So rubbish them, and what you think about yourself has to be positive. Like, I'm going to beat the bastards is good because they're the bastards and you're going to beat them. That's a positive message. So every time a red car overtakes you, think, I'm going to beat the bastards. And just keep repeating this as a sort of game for yourself, and see how your grin just gets broader and broader every time a red car overtakes you, because it will be an insider joke that you'll have with yourself. So this is how you can actually do what I call system judo. Take the bullshit that they serve you and just twist it around using the force that they are, putting on you to turn it around. And you know what? These guys will be throwing the best of psychology at you. So once you figure out the system, you will have excellent tips of how to, what to do in your own life. So it's worth analyzing this stuff. So, oh yes, why do they do it overtly? So number one was because they want to get under your skin. Number two is actually because if you do it overtly and you just say, what I really want to do is get under people's skin, you can hire the last morons. And there are dozens of them around. You see, if you wanted to do surveillance really well so that no one ever notices, you actually need to pick people who are good at it. They have to have like a brain, keep thinking in the situation, and be excellent actors. Well, that's really hard to do. So being good at a job is extremely hard. Being crap at a job is easy. So given that these intelligence agencies, especially MI5, just ballooned, MI5 doubled its budget and tripled its headcount after 2003. So this means they have to hire every, Tom, Dick and Harry that they can get. Not everybody wants to work for that club of jokers, so they really are, scraping the bottom of the barrel. Now, if you want to have top spies, it's not going to work. So they have to make the system such that it's actually just moron-compatible. And having overt stalking and overt surveillance is totally moron-compatible. You can be as shit as you like, and it will do the job. So that's reason number two. Reason number three, it's kind of specific to the UK, and this was uncovered by the legal team of Philip Kerr in the famous case of Philip Kerr versus MI5, which you can Google. Philip Kerr is spelled K-E-R-R, Kerr. And I should put the link below. But his legal team, he's a rich man, so his legal team had, Top Gun lawyers. But his legal team uncovered that the regulation of the Investigatory Powers Act, which is, called RIPA, is like a set of statutes or laws in the UK which regulate this whole surveillance industry. RIPA only ever talks about covert surveillance. So if you have overt surveillance, it doesn't really seem to fall under the remit of RIPA, or so they think. And if you think this is utter, nonsense to think like that, you have not been in an English court case before, because I have watched the Supreme Court for a long, long time. I have watched many, many cases for my work analyzing human systems. And by the way, you can watch the UK Supreme Court, and I recommend that you do, because it's brilliant. It's actually live, broadcast live over the internet. You can stream it, and you can get the top-notch court cases live and actually see how this whole thing unfolds. It is a treasure trove if you're interested in human systems. But watching court cases in the UK, this is not the most bullshit argument I've heard, So this whole thing about RIPA covering only covert surveillance is actually a really good point, which is why the lawyers brought it up. So this is why they would do it so overtly. So these three reasons: to disconcert you, because they can hire Muppets, and because it might not fall under the regulation, which only covers covert surveillance. Okay, then the other really common question is, why would they survey you 24/7? Right? And that's really easy to answer. It's because you either survey somebody 24/7 or not at all. Do you know why? Because if you're surveying somebody and you want to find out what they're doing, you can't just do that for 4 hours per day. Because, I mean, think about it. Or just, you know, during their work time. Let's say, you know, you just survey them between 9 or 8 a.m. and you know, 10 p.m. and then you go home. Okay, but what if one day at 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. they just climb into the car and just spontaneously drive off somewhere? Then what? Then what? How are you going to come back the next morning at 8 a.m. and track them down again? You see, so a surveillance network will be by definition 24/7. Otherwise it's not surveillance. Do you see? I mean, you might have really specific tasks if you're, say, a private investigator and you have to investigate, say, oh, does this person help themselves to the till at work? Okay, well, you can watch them at work, but you might maybe also find out if they're using that extra money to fuel a drug habit. So again, you would end up trying to survey them 24/7, do you see? But if it's actually a national surveillance provider, like MI5 and stuff, of course they will be set up to survey people for 24/7, right? Because otherwise it gets actually really hard. You either follow it, you know, track a ball all the time, or not at all, you know? So that's why it's 24/7. It has to be 24/7, and anything else would be just bonkers. Okay. Oh yes, and then the other really common question is, why would they use so many people just for you? And this question just comes up like all the time. And the answer is, it's not just for me, or it's not just for the person who's being gang stalked. You know, not at all. This is a national surveillance system. Okay, and you can figure out that this is how it would have to be if you just think about it like that. Let's start off with a country that doesn't have a secret service, and then people think, oh, it would be a really good idea to keep an eye on some people. If this is justified or not, if it's legal or not, forget about it now. They would just think that. Okay. And then you would start with, you know, hiring people to follow others around. Okay. If you have a few people, then you might have maybe like a crack team who just follows somebody like a cloud, you know, just around this person all the time, you know, before the person, behind the person, left and right of the person as they're driving down the motorway or, you know, wherever they go in a town, fine. And then more and more people would be added to a system like that, because following people around is just so interesting and also just so profitable. Think about all the businessmen who you could follow. There's already like a business opportunity there, you know? Okay. But even if it wasn't about the business opportunity, even if really these people were terrorists, yeah, right, even then, more and more people would be identified as terrorists, you know, especially if it's a national system. So before you know it, you would actually figure out that it's much easier to just have, say, for example, this person lives in, I don't know, name a city, in London, and then they travel to Birmingham. If you have also people being surveyed in Birmingham, then it's so much easier if the Birmingham team stays in Birmingham and the London team stays in London. And then you've got people who are surveying the motorway, you know, the interconnection links. And if the people turn off the motorway, there will be other people waiting, you know, to pick them up. This is so much better, and you can see why if you think about it in terms of motorways. Because then you would always have the people with the local knowledge there. So if you track people around, it really helps if you've got local knowledge of where the shortcuts, what's in that shop, what's behind there, you know, what's in that house, and this sort of stuff. So having local people with local knowledge is a real advantage for a surveillance network. And then before you know it, I mean, remember these surveillance systems have grown up over centuries. You know, the old royal families had their own informant networks, and these secret services grew out of that, and so on, you know. I mean, Queen Elizabeth I had her own surveillance network, and I forget what the name of the guy was who ran it. Was it Walsingham or... Anyway, those guys, right? So just like prostitution, this crap has been with us forever. Okay, by now these things are massive and everywhere. So this is why by now we have these decentralized stalking networks, and this means in practice that it will be a decentralized network, and when you're traveling along, even when you change cities, the only thing that will travel with you is the tracking protocol. Or if you're actually being shot at with electromagnetic weapons, your assault protocol. You know, they'll have these electromagnetic guns to shoot at you from cars, as I've experienced, you know, and found out now the last couple of months. They will have it in everywhere. And then you go, and then you will be shot at there. But other people will be just gang stalked and so on. But certainly the gang stalking, you know, will be done locally like that. And it's not that these people are there just for you. It's just that when you go there, you will be picking up the cloud that just happens to be, you know, in charge of the surveillance there in that region. And when you are not there, these guys are going to survey somebody else. Do you see? And by the way, these people were there long before you started being targeted or I started being targeted. We just never noticed them. Okay? And when you get sensitized, when you get overtly stalked, you suddenly pick up on these people. And I can tell you that after a while, you will also start seeing, especially in things like shopping malls, like the high street, you know, the high street with all the shops. Well, places like that don't just have your stalking team. There will be, as I kind of managed to figure out, like color-coded strands of stalkers, you know. And then you will be seeing the stalkers, but if you really watch carefully, you'll realize, and you have to really tune yourself into eye contact and hand signs. But then after a while, you'll be picking out stalkers that are not stalking you, but they're there to stalk somebody else, you know, and their path will be sometimes going tangentially, sometimes across to yours. And you think, hang on, why? I mean, it took me ages in the beginning to figure this out. Because I thought, oh, that one, oh no, now I'm really confused. Why did they go that way? And then eventually I realized, and it really, the color coding helps, that the color coding was the key, that actually they are part of a different team and you just happen to be walking down the high street, you know, and that's why they kind of stayed behind. But sometimes there also seems to be a redundancy. So you'll be stalked by two teams, not just one. You know, should one team lose you in their crossover of stalkers? Because remember, these people are stupid, right? It's not, you know, not professors of you know, aeronautics or whatever, right, of rocket science out in the street stalking people. So you have to make it simple. You know, and sometimes these people do cock up, so it's good to have two strands. But eventually you'll realize, oh, hang on, this seems to be part of another, you know, another system. So all of these things will be happening. And these people are not just there for you, they're just there, full stop. And if you're on a list, you'll pick them up. Hang on. And then the other questions are all kind of more subtle, to do with other aspects of the system. Maybe I put them into oh yes, and then okay, then there are also things like, aren't you just obsessed with the intelligence agencies, that you think, oh, they are everywhere and they're just following you? And I mean, I couldn't care less about the intelligence agencies before. I mean, I was working on the English court system, on the economies, on currencies, on human systems of all sorts of types, but the intelligence agencies, not really. But even if you were super interested in them from childhood, and you read all these spy novels, and you're, you know, watching all the documentaries, and you go to meetups trying to figure out more about spies, even if that were the case, it doesn't mean that, you know, you're not being stalked. In fact, if you've got a real interest in the intelligence agencies privately, it would just make it more likely that they would think, hang on, why is he or she so interested in us, you know? So then you might again end up on a surveillance list. So just because you have an independent interest in them and you claim to be stalked by them is not a contradiction. It could be that they started stalking you because you were just so interested in them, you know? So all of these things play into it. And then the question is, why would you be of continued interest? You know, why would it just go on for years and years and years? And the answer is that, I mean, first of all, you should probably start with another question. Why would they pick you? And that's hard to answer. It might not even have something to do with you, you see. It might be because someone who's really corrupt but has got a friend in the intelligence agency suggested you, and these people know that these lists exist. So it, you know, you might be a totally normal person, but someone else is really corrupt. So nothing about you will give that away, because it's entirely a property of them, not of you. So that's pretty random. I mean, you might have by accident pissed people off, really annoyed them, or you might have by accident done something, or maybe there is something really interesting about your work or what you've done or your activism, but it needn't even be that, you know. So why would they pick you? Well, if you can think of a really, really good reason. I mean, in my case, I was the odd one out at a high profile court case, and they are Muppets. That's why, you know. What can I do about that? You know, but it's kind of clear that yes, they would survey a court case like that. So my case is fairly clear, but you know, it needn't be clear. If there's absolutely no reason, you might still be followed, you know. And then you've got arguments of, oh, but you're not important enough that they would have an interest in you. Well, they might just want to pick you because you're not important, and then they might want to do human experimentation on you. So that's not an argument to discredit your claims. And then they say maybe, oh, you know, on the other hand, they can say, oh, but you're far too well connected, far too well known that they would ever do such a thing. Well, if you're really well known and really well connected, there might be a real reason to take you out. You know, so a takedown operation would be even more profitable, you see. So either way, it's not going to discredit your claims. You know, your claims have to be looked at stand alone, and the evidence has to be looked at in detail. What you claim, does it make sense, you know, and all that sort of stuff. And then the question is why would you be of continued interest? Why do you think would it go on and on and on for years? Well, let's look at the no-fly list. There are certified, definite cases where there was no point to put these people on the no-fly list. Is there a mechanism to automatically be taken off it? No, because these intelligence agencies are run in such a shit way. There is no maintenance, and there is also no incentive, because they've got these sprawling organizations. They have to train their gang stalkers. So once they surveyed somebody up and down and they know you're harmless, you're going to be even more attractive to keep you on a list, because then they know they can keep throwing their little, you know, trainee gang stalkers at you, or their trainee, you know, whatever. We need to teach them how to shoot at people with microwave weapons trainees, you know, at you. So there are a million reasons like that. And there are thousands of examples where it's certified that, you know, these intelligence agencies go on and on and on like a bunch of brainless morons. For example, in Germany, there's the case of Rolf Gössner, a lawyer. He's been under surveillance for 40 years just because, you know, he was at a left-wing protest when he was a university student, like 40 frickin' years ago. The Verfassungsschutz, these, you know, idiots, keep surveying this guy. He's a lawyer. What is there to, you know? Anyway, that's one example. From the UK, there's Philip Kerr. He's been stalked for over 13 years, and these people still keep going. MI5 still keeps going, you know. And many, 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 many more cases like that. So it seems to be rather the default setting is they stalk you until the end of your life, because never before in the history of these messed up organizations has there been any transparency, any public scrutiny, and therefore no mechanism to tidy up this bullshit has ever been put into place. And there's a reason for that, because, and that comes from systems analysis, and that's because even for the people at the top, because it's so hard to have a real power over this, like, you know, cartwheeling, you know, coterie of idiots, they need external pressure to pass on the pressure, you know, to the people below to stop nonsense like that. If no external pressure exists, and you have things like the Official Secrets Act barring anybody from looking inside and anybody from the inside complaining to the outside, you have essentially a black box, and never ever will there be an incentive to cut the crap. Do you see? So what you'll end up with once MI5 exists for, you know, overall a couple of 100 years, and nominally maybe, you know, for, you know, 100 years or whatever, you will end up with the most dysfunctional organization. It's like having British Telecom and no customer service helpline. No customers ever allowed to complain, ever. Well, what sort of organization would that be then? You know, they can do whatever they like, and not even their own employees can complain about egregious cases to the press, ever. And no customer is ever allowed to actually see how their methods work, you know. Now, British Telecom was pretty shit when they cocked up my telephone line. And I had to fight them. I had to threaten to take them to court to get my money back and have them get their act together. And they are, you know, fairly public company. And they were that bad. Now just think what MI5 is like by now. You see? Any more questions? I thought so. All of the questions will be answered in later videos. Thank you for listening.